Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leadership, Race, and Authenticity, a candid conversation with St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter. My name is Eric Alexander. I'm the founder and chair of BANDD, the Twin Cities Black Affinity Network Development Day. I want to welcome you all here today and look forward to the conversation with the mayor and looking forward to the key takeaways and expertise that he's going to share with us and how we can apply that to ourselves as professionals and in our as we endeavor to impact our community. So from an agenda perspective, I'll do a BANDD overview, and then we'll have a one-on-one conversation with the mayor, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask Q&A. You can do that two ways, one by just raising your hand and having a verbal question, or we can have Eric Black, who's managing our Q&A for us, to pose those questions to the mayor on your behalf. Then I'll give the mayor some time at the end to share some final parting thoughts with the attendees, and then we'll wrap up for a hard stop at 1 p.m. So. The other thing I wanted to note is that the session is being recorded. The benefit of that is for those who weren't able to attend, they'll have the link. Those who attended and would like to revisit some of the content, you'll be able to review that once I send the link out. So, who is BANDD? I created BANDD in 2013. Our vision is to leverage the scale, scope, and expertise embodied within the Black affinity networks within the Twin Cities to deliver against four key outcomes. The first and primary for us is delivering quality professional development, and that's the core of what we do. The other three pillars that we have are building community connections, and that feeds into the work that we've done regarding it's okay to not be okay post the George Floyd murder, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on the Black community. We also foster cross-organizational relationships and networking and building relationships with others within your function, within your career field, or just building relationships in general. And the fourth pillar is strengthening affinity networks and organizations. The goal of our content is to develop you as a professional so that you have the skills and expertise to deliver against your professional and career goals. But as a result of that, your organization should grow and be stronger as a result. So that's kind of why we exist. The one through line that goes through all the work we do is development through collaboration. Our vision is that we're stronger together than we are apart. We think that if we have conversations together focusing on the right things, that there's nothing we can't achieve. And so that's kind of why we exist and what we're endeavored to bring to the Twin Cities community. I want to acknowledge the organizations that provide the board members and the funding to support our initiatives. So there's Best Buy, Cargill, General Mills, Target, Wells Fargo, US Bank, and Johnson & Johnson. And so once we do transition back to the in-person sessions, they'll be actively engaged in the sponsorship of those events to ensure that everyone who wants to learn and grow and develop as a professional has that opportunity. And as a result of our sponsorship, we have no fees for attendees. And so financial access is not a barrier to your ability to grow and develop as a professional. So that's one of the key benefits of our partnership relationship. So I want to recognize our 2021 BANDD board. None of the work that we do could be done without this talented group of professionals. They actively give of their talent, expertise, and time to ensure that our community has access to the skills, knowledge, and expertise to grow and achieve their career objectives. I want to highlight three specific board members, Eric Black and Janelle Foster. They're founding board members. So they've been on this journey with me since day 3 of 2013. So I appreciate their support and their engagement. I also want to call out B. Ken Charles, who is our executive sponsor and was instrumental in the launch of BANDD and its continued growth and success as an initiative. On this slide, I just wanted to give the group a feel for the scope of impact that we have. This slide references our last in-person BANDD session. In that session, we had over 75 organizations represented. And as you look at the slide, the organizations with the largest sponsor are the ones that have the most registrants. But it gives a feel for the fact that there are a lot of larger organizations that are represented, but we also have individual professionals who are looking for opportunities, small business owners, all who are looking to grow and develop themselves. And BANDD is an opportunity and a space that's uniquely equipped to provide them the knowledge and expertise to do that. So what are our results since our launch in 2013? So we've delivered over 2,800 hours of planning time. So that's the board and support staff, developing content, networking, finding speakers, things that are done in the background to ensure that we execute flawless events. We've had over 84 development sessions. So these are the sessions like the one we're having today that gives our attendees the opportunity to learn unique skills and achieve their professional goals. We're nearing 3,000 attendees cumulative since 2013 launch. Again, almost 3,000 attendees, which is outstanding. Again, think of 3,000 professionals that have the opportunity to network with people that look like them, who have a combined focus on achieving career success and the ability to network with them outside of the session to achieve against their goals. And close to 10,000 hours of development combined for our attendees, and our expected outcome, a more inspired, equipped, and engaged TC Band community. And I assume if we're in person, everybody will be clapping at this point because these are outstanding results, but I don't hear it, so I'm assuming that you're doing that internally to yourself. So thank you for those applause. So what are we gonna do in 2021? So this is a high-level schedule of our events. The first event, Building Black Wealth, has already happened. So outstanding event there that provides content, providing content to our attendees regarding financial acumen. It started with those who are on their entry-level journey to financial wealth, as well as those who are more advanced and are looking to make the next step in their financial journey. Obviously, this session, Leadership, Race, and Authenticity. Our next session is with Donzo Leggett, Leadership and Anti-Racism, which would be a great session. And then we have 2 seminars coming up, one in June and the other one in the October-November timeframe. And so if you haven't registered for our future events, feel free to do so. This is just a slide that I wanted to make sure that I re-acknowledge our panelists and presenters from our first session. Outstanding content, outstanding engagement, and transparent and transformational knowledge was shared during that session. This is a list of our upcoming events. This information will be on your website, and what it does is provide a snippet of the session, what you should expect from a content perspective, and then it'll provide opportunities to register. And in a shameless marketing plug, this is our next session. If you have your smartphone available, feel free to grab the QR code, and you can go ahead and register for that event right now. So I'll pause for 5 seconds to let everyone do that. Great, and I'm sure registration increased by probably 126 registrants, Eric Black, so we're excited about that. Thumbs up. All right, so for those who want to stay in touch with us, these are some ways you can stay in touch. You can go to our website, you can connect with us on our LinkedIn group, you can connect with us on our email, YouTube, Instagram, so there are lots of ways to contact us. So now that I've talked about TC Band, let's talk about our presenter today. So Mayor Carter was born in the Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota. He's the son of Tony Carter, a Ramsey County commissioner, and Melvin Whitfield Carter, a now retired St. Paul police officer. Carter is a 4th generation St. Paul resident. He's a graduate of St. Paul Central High School and was University of Minnesota Talented Youth and Mathematics program. He earned his bachelor's degree in business administration from FAMU. I'm also an HBCU grad, so I look forward to having that conversation with you, Mayor. And he also received his master's of public policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. So let's talk about the mayor's successes. And I went into a lot of detail on this slide because as I looked at the questions from attendees, a lot of them were around what is the mayor doing to support the immigrant population? What's the mayor doing to focus on criminal justice and fair policing within the St. Paul area? What he's doing around equity? And so he and his staff were kind enough to put a lot of that information on his website, so I was able to pull it out for you and highlight the key takeaways. First thing I highlight is that he's the 46th and first Black mayor of St. Paul. And he's the chief executive of the 64th largest city in the US. I'm sorry, Mayor, you lost 1 slot in 2021. You were 63 last year, so wanted to identify that in my research. A city of over 310,000 residents, a staff of 3,000 employees, and a budget closing in on $750 million. Some of the results that he's delivered is he increased the minimum wage by $15. As you see on a national level, there are initiatives to try to do that on a national level. He was able to deliver that for his constituents at the city level. He increased tripled the free program in rec centers, giving our youth the opportunity to do something productive with their time. He eliminated library fees, which I think that's good for those in the libraries. Reestablished an affordable housing trust fund. He expanded immigrant and refugee support resources. He launched the Office of Financial Empowerment. He launched College Bound St. Paul, which is a great initiative. It invests in the youth of the St. Paul community by giving them a $50 savings bond that can be invested towards their future college aspirations. So, a great initiative there in investing in our youth. And then he worked to revise the city's use of force policy, and he partnered to create a $3 million research-based public policing initiative. He is committed to police accountability and law enforcement reform. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Melvin Carter. Would you like to share some thoughts with us?
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be in this space, and I appreciate that incredibly generous introduction. I don't know if you know, you're showing us your desktop right now, so that's a beautiful family picture as well. But you know, I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all to have this conversation. I'm working from home, so you'll hear doorbells and dogs barking and babies crying and things like that, because this is what this chapter of life is for us all. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and appreciate all of you. This has been the greatest leadership challenge of my life, leading this community through in particular, over this last year and a half or so. But at the same time, it's an incredible opportunity. You know, I'm of the opinion that just about nothing new happened in 2020, that we saw the impact of what happens when people feel the brunt of a healthcare crisis that they don't have the tools, the resources to address. We saw the impact of what happens in communities when people lose their jobs through no fault of their own, when people lose their housing through no fault of their own. We saw yet another unarmed African-American man lose his life at the hands of Minnesota police officers. And we saw the ways in which all of those things conspire and conflate together to cause crises on literally every single on every single level. And so, you know, this is I think a demonstration year behind us that demonstrates how all of these things impact, in particular, our communities of color most profoundly. And my hope is that we can look ahead of us to say we're going to develop a vast new toolkits for how we keep our communities safe, for how we ensure families have what they need to meet their goals, for how we educate our children, for how we build an inclusive, more resilient economy than what we had when we walked into this, when we walked into all this. So I know you have questions. I want to leave space to have the conversation, but it's intriguing to have this conversation. And I think the opportunity to ensure that those of us who are fighting to change the scenario, the situations that we find ourselves navigating in our community and the public sector, are engaging across sectors with those of you in the private sector and the nonprofit sector, and that we're all sort of working together in a set of strategies that are proverbially greater than the sum of their parts. So that's why I'm intrigued by this conversation.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mayor. So the conversations are going to be broken up into a couple of spaces. The first one is leadership and authenticity. And then there'll be a set of questions regarding race, if that works for you. First question for you, why did you go into politics?
That's a good question. I went into politics. I actually was doing a lot of the background type of stuff. I remember, so I went to college. I went to Florida A&M University, as you mentioned, and found myself in this space that was really remarkable and incredible, where I left Minnesota, where I grew up here, and found myself in Florida, just surrounded by some of the most incredible, talented, brilliant people I had ever known in my entire life, who looked like me. But one thing that felt different from Minnesota to when I went to Florida, from going to high school in Minnesota to when I went to Florida, is these folks who were knocking the exams out of the park and doing community service and doing all these incredible things as leaders, were also people who I enjoyed staying up at night playing cards with, or playing spades with, or playing dominoes outside the dorms, or hanging out with on a Friday. And, you know, my experience growing up in Minnesota was frankly that the people who I had class with on a Monday were not the same people who I wanted to be around kind of and hang out with on the weekend for the most part. And so that was this fundamentally different thing. All that to say, I was at FAMU during what ended up being a real civil rights emergent experience. We were down there as former Governor Jeb Bush attempted to dismantle affirmative action in Florida. But we were down there during Census 2000 as, you know, we had this like big conversation for my first time as an adult about how the census matters and makes a difference towards who's counted and who's not. We were down there during a series of hate bombings on our campus in which, you know, some racist guy, you know, detonated pipe bombs on our campus with a racially motivated hate bombing. The FBI occupied our campus, and we had to hold our student ID. We had to wear our student ID cards around our neck, or else you'd be questioned by the FBI. And then we were down there during election 2000. If you remember election 2000 in Florida, I first realized something was tragically wrong when we went to vote. I was living with my older sister, her husband, and their 2-year-old daughter at the time. Many of you may know my older sister, Anika Ward, who's here in Minnesota as well. But I was living with them. And my brother-in-law, I remember thinking, I wasn't this like super political student. I remember thinking I'll probably go vote after class if I have time. And my brother-in-law said, hey, everybody who lives here is going to vote today. And so, you know, it wasn't a question. So I got in the car and we waited in line for 30, 45 minutes out in the cold. I love saying that because it was Florida, and Minnesotans laugh when I say that. But, you know, on this day in November, and we get to the front of the line, and my sister voted and I voted, and my brother got turned away from the polls. And we sat there arguing his right to vote in the year 2000, arguing his right to vote. And come to find out, we had hundreds of other of our classmates who went through that same experience. And I think ultimately, we were standing there angry and confused and embarrassed. And the people behind us had waited 30 minutes too. And they're like, come on, man, move so we can vote. And it was this like really profound sense of powerlessness that seemed to just be wrong at its core. It connected me in a way that I had never really felt connected to some of the civil rights stories that I had read about. It made me understand why just people not having a voice in and of itself is the way evil is inflicted upon us. And it sort of, I think in retrospect, I realized I just couldn't reconcile this experience that we were having. You know, we talk about the apathetic or cynical voters or the people who don't participate, but we don't really acknowledge the fact that we have people who go out of their way to participate, who we turn away at the door of civic participation. And that contradicts everything that we all learned in our schools growing up in social studies class about the thing that makes America, America. The sort of secret sauce is that if you want to say, you get to say that's not really the case. And that was something that was a profound aha for me and that sent me into politics. So ultimately, my mission in politics, my personal mission statement is to not let my children or your children, our neighbors, ever feel that sense of powerlessness that we felt arguing that right to vote. And that sort of North Star guides most of what we do in City Hall.
Got it. Great. I think that might also it definitely feeds into two of my additional questions. One around what your vision is and what your leadership style is. But quick touch base back on your HBCU experience. Can you talk to the group around what the value is of HBCU experience? I know what my personal perspective it is, but what's yours? The value of going to an HBCU as a Black professional.
Well, clearly I went to the largest and the livest of the historically Black colleges. And it's my turn to speak now, so there's no there's no space to debate.
I did go on mute.
Right. And I also see some background, so I'll share that I also joined the first and leading historically Black collegiate fraternity while I was there. And y'all know which one I'm talking about. But you know, I think the role of HBCUs is clear, and we've had this conversation about like, are they still relevant? Are they still needed? Like, what's the purpose of an HBCU right now? But in the meantime, over this last year and a half, as America has faced this like these existential crises, we've seen leaders like Kamala Harris step forward. We've seen leaders like Stacey Abrams step forward. We've seen leaders like Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms step forward. We've seen all these kind of incredible African-American leaders who have stepped to the forefront. And not all of them, but a very large percentage of them found their voice through attendance of a historically Black college and university. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. And as we look around the country and we see people like Attorney Ben Crump step forward. Attorney Ben Crump didn't go to Florida A&M University, but he hung out at his first law firm was Parks and Crump. And in that name, Parks went to Florida A&M University. And, I actually remember going to their law firm for parties during homecoming. So he is very much, not a product not an alumni of our university, but a product in many ways of a historically Black college as well. So, we see the prominence of historically Black colleges and the continued relevance through the impacts and the contributions of the alumni around the country. That's true. Ben Crump is an Omega Psi Phi member. He was smart enough to launch his law firm with a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And I think between the two of them, I saw that in the chat. So between the two of them, they were able to hold down both the first and the last. So that was a good thing. The Alpha and Omega involved. But kidding aside, it gave me the opportunity to sort of find my voice. It gave me the opportunity in business school at Florida A&M University to not just learn financial accounting, but learn a little bit something about how to navigate corporate America as an African-American man, which is unique and not all schools can teach you. And I actually think one of the most powerful things that I got from my time at Florida A&M was this incredible network, right? The world got to know a couple years ago. Can you stop her from playing the piano? I'm working from home, y'all. The world got to know
Understood.
a couple years ago a gubernatorial candidate in Florida by the name of Andrew Gillum, who I got to know when I was 19 years old at Florida A&M University when we studied there together. And it's incredible to me, both my FAMU network that I have access to, and I already mentioned Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, who's a Florida A&M University alumni as well. But one of the things that I tell my mentees is if you go to Harvard, you get access to the Harvard Alumni Network. If you go to Yale, you get access to the Yale Alumni University Network. But if you go to FAMU, you get access to the HBCU Alumni Network, which in many ways is so much more powerful because, if I see a resume come across my desk that has Howard on it, or that has Morehouse on it, that has North Carolina A&T on it, or any other of the historically Black colleges around the country, I pay particular interest in that resume because I know that's a person who has a common experience with me, kind of where all of those types of things are concerned.
Great, thank you. And that kind of feeds into the other conversation we want to have around authenticity. And so you've talked about your HBCU experience and ability to kind of show up and represent that your fraternity and your school. How do you feel as a Black professional, as a Black mayor, as a Black CEO of a city? How do you feel that you can show up? Can you show up and be yourself? Can you be authentic? Or how authentic can you be?
When I was running for mayor, there came a point in time where I told my campaign manager, I remember telling her, it is clear to me that we can get 50%, more than 50% of the votes on election day. But what I want to find out that I'm not sure about, frankly, is if I can win, right? If I bring my full, the full complexities of my experience and perspective, where policing is concerned, where education is concerned, where community development is concerned, where equity is concerned, and all of these other kind of things, is that something that people will relate to? And we tried. We thought of it as a big bet because, frankly, it felt risky. And it sort of felt like we were stepping out on a limb a little bit further and further. And ironically, each time we stepped, we found there was solid ground underneath us. I reflect on like the 2016 election, in which I think we learned a lot. And sadly, I think my party learned some of the wrong lessons, in that I see members of my party say, well, we have to moderate our voice or become more conservative or be less, be more apologetic and not do things like raise the minimum wage or eliminate late fines in libraries and all these types of bold things that we take on. To me, the real lesson of the 2016 election was that Americans are tired of performance politics, right? Of what seems mechanical or what seems artificial. That Americans, in my opinion, in 2016 elected someone who they knew to be a buffoon because he appeared authentic every day, over someone who we knew to be a genius, a very brilliant, because she appeared to be artificial or very curated, or over curated, maybe I'll say. And so our goal is to be is to just be me, right? My goal is to just bring my full self to this work, to share with this community my challenges, my frustrations, my stresses, the fact that like it's hard sitting here having this conversation while a 14-month-old is playing the piano and screaming in the background, and that's like really all I have to offer you is who exactly I am, and that honestly does still feel risky, but I think it's necessary in this moment. I think it helps us to do things that we otherwise would not be able to do. For example, we're having a big conversation around public safety right now in St. Paul and around the country, as COVID has caused kind of crime increases, and particularly violent crime increases all over the country, all over the planet. St. Paul has not been immune to them. And politically speaking, the easiest thing for me to do would be to just do the same short answer, oversimplified public safety rhetoric, tough on crime type of rhetoric, that we're used to, right? That placates us every other time we feel unsafe. But the problem is we've done it so many times, we've proven that cycle doesn't actually make our neighborhoods safer. It doesn't actually work, doesn't actually produce the outcomes that we want. And the problem is that I live in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and I hear shots fired at the intersection that I'm looking at right here far too much. And so, I don't have the ability to oversimplify like that. I don't have the ability to take political rhetorical shortcuts, particularly where something as important as public safety is concerned. And it's something that where we land in a much stronger place than we possibly could have before unless our St. Paul voters had given me that license to literally bring myself kind of into this role.
Great, thank you. Due to time, we'll shift over kind of to the kind of race conversation. In preparation for our interview, being an HBCU grad, so I had to prep and get ready because we're professionals in that space. And so one of the interviews that I read, that I listened to for you, had three really poignant points for me as I listened. And so one of them was around the time being challenging. And so someone made a comment, how are you doing? A Black man in Minnesota with everything that's going on. This must be challenging for you. And your response, which I thought was great, it is challenging for me. I assume it's challenging for you as well. So can you talk about, it was powerful, can you talk about the shared accountability for the social justice journey that we're on?
Yeah, like it drives me crazy when people are like, oh, as a Black man, it must hurt. And I'm like, as a human being, it hurts to see someone's life choked out from them, right? If I see them as a person in the same way as I see me, like, you shouldn't be giving me condolences. We should be giving each other condolences around this. And if you think that this is something that only hurts me because I'm Black too, then it tells me something, I think, about the way you look at this moment, right? And yeah, I remember the interview that you're talking about because it was just, I don't know, I was somewhat taken aback by kind of being on that. It's intriguing the extent to which we don't, we fail to see each other's humanity. When we decide that we disagree on something, we can decide to just completely discount somebody's humanity. I was talking to a woman who I knew after Philando Castile was murdered, and she was from Poland. Her family was from Poland, and she was telling me how she couldn't understand why Black people have these kind of concerns about police. So if somebody asks you for your ID, I just give them my identification. And if somebody, and why, if you have nothing to hide, why don't you just give them your ID? And I was saying, that probably works for the first 3 to 6 times you're pulled over. I think, somewhere around time 15, you might start to get frustrated. And somewhere around time 89 that you have to explain to somebody why you're peacefully obeying all known laws, you might start to get really angry about that, and that's frankly been my experience. My friends used to joke when I was in high school, my first car was a 2-tone gray 1984 Monte Carlo, right? Which any police officer or insurance agent in the country would tell you is the most stolen car in America. It was amazing in ways that only like a 16-year-old boy can truly ever really appreciate. But I got pulled over literally every 6 to 8 blocks. This was with my father as a St. Paul. This is with my father in internal affairs in the St. Paul Police Department. I got pulled over like 6 to 8 blocks, right? I would have officers follow me 8 blocks literally to come up with a BS reason to pull me over, right? And I've been pulled over for all the BS reasons that we've seen in all these videos. All that to say, I was having this conversation with this woman, and she couldn't get it. Later, we were having a conversation. This woman from Poland, she was telling me how her grandfather in Nazi Poland, as they were occupied by the Nazis, or when the Nazi soldiers came around, her grandfather would hide his daughters in the barn. And I said, well, why? What did he have to hide? Was he doing something illegal? What did he have to hide? Like when the police came around, why did he hide his daughters, right? If he had nothing to hide. And she said, well, no, you don't understand. Like those Nazi soldiers, those secret police would inflict harms. They and people, they were well known that they would inflict harms and violence on Jewish women, on Polish American women. And she was trying to explain this to me. And I said, I do get it, actually, right? Like, I think your grandfather would be insane not to have hidden his daughters in those kind of spaces. It's just incredible to me that you see absolutely no connection between all these videos that we keep seeing over and over and over again, where the people who we pay to keep us safe are the ones inflicting harm, literally slow choking the life out of George Floyd, or oops, I accidentally shot him with Dante Wright. And you can't figure out, I mean, people ask me why did Dante Wright why was he scared? Why did he run from the police officer? And I'm like, the police officer who accidentally shot him to death? Like, you're asking why he was afraid? It's somewhat self-evident. It's a self-answering question. And so, it's one of these spaces where, this shouldn't be a black fight. It shouldn't be a people of color fight. And it really shouldn't be a fight at all. It's not against police. One of the things I think that was really brilliant in the prosecution of that case was this notion that this isn't an anti-police case. It's actually an inherent pro-police case, because we cannot defend the integrity of our police officers, of our police departments, of our public safety system. There's just no defense, not in Minneapolis, not in St. Paul, not in Minnesota, not in America, not in the world. There's no defense if we say that that's okay, when the entire rest of the world can look at this and say it's not okay. So I think it's about the rule of law in our country. I think it's about our ability to just claim a modern civilized society. And I think it's about our ability to continue to think and evolve who we are. I think this has to become more than a civil rights issue, because the implications are far beyond just black and white.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. Just for the audience, I'm going to pose 2 more questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience for questions. So the things that you want to know that I haven't covered, feel free to prepare those questions. One other thing I took away from that question, that interview, and it was your comment regarding Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. Your perspective was, looks like the law enforcement infrastructure has figured out that white lives matter and others' lives matter. The reason for the push is that they need to figure out that Black lives matter. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that was another great point that you made that addressed a concern that we hear a lot regarding the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, I mean, and we were talking about the video of the guy who dragged the police officer, and we always see these videos, right? Where there's an older white man who pulls out a gun, or shouts at an officer, or pushes an officer back, and we go, or a white mob that attacks the nation's capital, right? And we go, oh, sorry, my dog was about to sound off on us all.
You're good.
And we go, well, why? How come they're still alive? When the truth is, the problem isn't that they're still alive. They should still be alive. The problem is, how come we can't survive those types of encounters? How come those types of encounters always end up escalating in our community, end up escalating when we're involved, end up escalating when it's an African-American man? And we see de-escalation, we see respectful engagement and conversation, we see humanism and shared humanity in all these videos that involve other communities. At some level, like what we're asking for regarding police isn't something new, right? What we're asking for is what we grew up seeing on the Andy Griffith Show, right? We saw on the Andy Griffith Show officers who knew which kids were in 6th grade and which kids were in 7th grade, which kids had a field trip tomorrow when they found some teenager on a Friday night, which kids needed to spend the night in jail and learn a lesson, and which kids needed a tough talking to and a ride home, who were like embedded in the community. And all of a sudden we have this phenomenon that, which is like, what's new is this incredible phenomenon in which we have police officers who live in Wisconsin who drive a pickup truck or motorcycle in town to patrol in our community, like an external kind of occupying force, and then go back somewhere else, right? I told you my father's a retired St. Paul police officer, and he would tell you no matter what kind of accountability or internal affairs structures you have, there's nothing that can hold you accountable, keep you honest, knowing that your children are going to meet the people you encounter as a police officer. My parents went to Alaska a couple of years ago. My father came back laughing about this nature hike, this like at dusk that my mother dragged him on. They went on this nature hike. And my father said, I would be a terrible police officer in Alaska. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, we went on this nature hike, and I can tell you, if I was an officer, literally everything that moved could have gotten shot in the genuine interest of officer safety. Right. And I could testify in court that I feared for my life. But the problem isn't that the bunny was like trying to attack me. The problem is I don't know this environment. I don't feel comfortable here. I don't feel safe here. I walked into the space feeling threatened. And no matter what that little bunny rabbit did, I would have felt threatened by it because I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't in my own environment. And so I think that's what we're pushing for. And I think what adds insult to injury, Eric, is that we see the examples over and over and over again. We see that what we're asking for is not outrageous. It's not ridiculous. It's not pie in the sky or outlandish. It's actually very, very reasonable. And the reason we know that is because we keep seeing it over and over and over. And that was the point that I was trying to make in that interview, that, you know, we don't necessarily have to say white lives matter because we see it on screen all the time. We see it in these interactions all the time. We don't necessarily have to say that police lives matter because we see it. We've proven that. Like our whole country is set up, designed. We're actually having a conversation in the U.S. Senate right now to determine if a police officer breaks the law, when is it okay to actually hold them legally accountable for it, right? We're that's actually a real debate we're having among our nation's purportedly brightest policy thinkers. And so we see those things are self-evident. What's not clear, what's not self-evident is from a systemic perspective, from a policy perspective, from a corporate perspective, that we as a country know, or that our public safety systems know, that Black Lives Matter as well. And that's why that has to be shouted from the rooftops.
Great. Thank you. My last question for you. A lot of the feedback that I got from a survey perspective, and even my personal interest, is, you know, how can we help as individual community members? Maybe, and some of it was a few different groups. I live in the suburbs. I don't live in the inner city, or I don't live in a city in close enough to the city where it's impacting me directly. Some of the things that are happening. I'm an ally. I want to know what I can do to help. I have skills. I have skills in conflict resolution, skills in de-escalation. I have all these skills that, as a professional, I will volunteer free of charge on my off time. How can I help?
Wow, that's a big question, and I appreciate it. There's so many levels I can answer that question on. As you know, we need, I think, a fundamental, brand new all-in with our community, right? We've called gun violence a pandemic. We've called violent crime a pandemic. We've called these things public health issues, but we've continued to address them as police issues. We've gotten a brand new language around pandemics over the course of the last year. We know that, for example, when we have a pandemic, we know about contact tracing. We know about kind of testing. We know about how to identify the people who have been impacted by something, and know that in the same way as someone who, you know, the number one indicator that somebody might get COVID is if you've been around somebody with COVID, right? So we identify people who've been around somebody with COVID, who may have made contact with it, And we kind of have all these interventions that we do to say, we want to separate, we want to test, we want to treat, we want to do all those things. We've identified that, nursing homes and, people with immunocompromised conditions, et cetera, we've identified them as high-risk populations. And when we identify high-risk populations, we concentrate our resources in our highest risk populations proactively to help prevent cases from spiking in the first place. And so part of what I'm arguing is, let's take that language that we've learned and apply it to public safety, right? When we identify high-risk communities, high-risk individuals regarding public safety, we shun them, we send them to the outside of our society, and we disinvest in them and do the exact opposite of what we've rehearsed kind of this year. All that to say is, fixing all the things that we're talking about is going to require high touch, and it's going to require far more than the resources that I wield as the mayor of the city, right? We need tutors for our children. We need mentors for our young people. We need folks to shovel the snow for our grandmothers. We need like all of those things. And literally whatever skill that you bring or whatever your company does, we need the help, right? We need access to that to be able to kind of transform the outcomes in our communities. So on a face level, we need your volunteerism. Whether it's as a mentor, we're having this conversation right now. What would it look like to engage our churches, to engage our professional organizations, to engage you all, to engage our Black employee groups at all of our different companies, and challenge you to help us identify 300 mentors for young African-American youth in our community who need them. So that would be, that's a call that we're kind of preparing right now with the notion that we might bring to you. We govern the city through a whole host of task forces and commissions, whether it's our board on aging, to our kind of parks advisory board, to our bicycle advisory board, and those types of things. In order to these are the organizations that bring the recommendations that the city council and I ultimately decide upon. And so we're always pushing to diversify and bring more people of color, more African-American community members kind of into those spaces. So if you're a St. Paul resident, or if you work in St. Paul or operate a business in St. Paul, I would certainly invite you to let us know. And I always tell folks, like, we have so many that literally whatever you're interested in, there's a commission for that. And I make those appointments. So I would very much welcome those recommendations coming from you, as well as when we hire our leadership team. We need leaders who are brilliant, who represent our communities, and who bring, I think, a different set of perspectives into the work. And so, those are all the types of things that we would kind of partner with you. And then also, as an elected official who's running for re-election this year, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, find elected leaders who you support and help support them with resources and volunteerism, volunteer time as well. Now, I will tell you, we're predisposed to know, right? The first controversial vote I ever took when I was on the city council in 2008, ironically, was about tasers. I voted against buying a taser for every officer in the department because I felt like we didn't have the policies or the practices in place to hold ourselves accountable to it well. All that to say, I was sitting there and I knew I was going to lose the vote on a 1-6 vote, but it meant a lot to me. And I was making this argument, and I sort of stonewalled this public hearing for an hour and a half, literally an hour and a half. And there's like 200 people, 150 people, whatever, waiting for their next turn to have their public hearing. Literally everybody in the room is tired of me talking, and I'm stonewalling this public hearing to make sure that we had a full airing of all of these facts. And I'm asking the police chief and asking the training sergeant, and we're having this kind of robust debate. And I got to the point where I felt like, you know what, just stop. Like, you're by yourself. Nobody agrees with you. You're not changing anything, and you've already lost this argument. Just leave it alone. You've lost. And I was feeling really, really small. I kid you not, true story. I looked behind me in the audience, and in this room of like 200 people, there's literally 4 African-American community members sitting on the bench behind me. And I turned around and looked at them, and they went, right? They just nodded and gave me the thumbs up. And it was like that scene in Popeye when he eats the spinach and he and is like ready for the fight. And I say it to just say that when Trump says something insane, or when McConnell says something insane, or when Senate Republicans in Minnesota say something insane, we're always ready to tweet that we hate that, right? But I think we are too slow to identify the people who are doing good work, to identify the people who we support. to identify the people whose work we hope keeps a little air in the sails, I think we can be too slow to look at them and say, hey, we think you're doing a really good job. Whether that's political leaders or your leaders in your companies, that goes a really, really, or in your families, that goes a really, really long way.
Great. So Mayor Carter, you are doing a great job.
I appreciate it. Thank you. If you all just come off mute and tell me I'm doing a great job, that would, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm speaking for the entire group. I'm confident of that. So thanks for your time. So want to transition to Q&A. Eric Black, are there any questions in the chat that we want to surface to the mayor?
No, we didn't have any chair questions come up in the chat, so I would open it up if there's a question from the floor.
Hey, Eric, it's Janelle. Mayor, thank you so much for being with us. The comments so far, I really appreciate all that you're doing and would echo Eric's sentiments. You're doing an incredible job. My question has to do with what you touched on earlier, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's been in the House sitting, again, waiting for this approval to go through. And, for many of us in the Black community, we're watching all these other legislative bills get passed to support Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, to support LGBTQ, but we're still sitting here as, Black people waiting for our turn. And I'm just struggling with kind of what's the holdup. And would love for you to just give some thoughts, perspectives on, just your own personal thoughts around that. Thank you.
I'm probably not the person to objectively speak on what the holdup is, because I, like you, look at that and say, like, what's the problem? And at some point, I think, my father used to say something that was really interesting. He would talk about the Black Power movement, right? And and ultimately what my father would say is like, look, the Black Power movement was like about saying like, I'm going to wear a dashiki and I love your afro, and let's like support Black owned businesses and affirm each other's dignity and beauty and, power. And white people were afraid of it, right? And my father's theory was the reason white people were afraid of it was because they thought it was the reciprocal of what white power meant, right? Which was always a rallying cry to go inflict violence upon non-white people, and particularly Black people. And it's an intriguing thing, because even as we say Black Lives Matter, we know that there are people who hear that as a hostility towards them, when in fact it's an affirmation, right? And I think some of that fear, some of that white supremacy, some of that codified kind of structural racism in our systems is what we're bumping up against, right? And the ability to kind of push us forward. I also think that we have, maybe this is a more intelligent answer, is that I think I was on an interview recently and they asked me like, there's this big problem that people, don't like all police, right? And obviously it's just like these bad apples, but people are like saying they don't like any police ever. How do we solve that problem? One, it's remarkable to me that you can see everything that's gone on in the past year and think that that's the problem. But two, that a response is a direct reaction to people, our police union leaders, our political leaders, our former president, who ultimately have told us forever that you can't be against police abuse without being against all police. That if you don't like Derek Chauvin putting his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, if you don't like the officer Yanez shooting Philando Castile in front of his 4-year-old daughter, then you must hate all police, right? And I think we've internalized that, and that's one of the reasons why people have this like gut reaction and saying, wait a minute, I don't feel safe around police, not only because I've seen these videos, but because I've seen people get away with it, and our court system has said like that has sanctioned that as okay, but because so many of our kind of purported leaders keep telling us that that's what policing is, right? That if you're against that, you must just be against policing. And I think that too many of our leaders in Washington, D.C. embody that on the other side of the aisle, embody that kind of that belief as well, right? And don't get the difference between being against police abuse and being against police, and figuring out ways to kind of split that question, I think is going to continue to be more and more important to actually making progress on this issue.
Great, thank you. Eric, we have time for probably one more question. Was there something in the chat that you want to share with us?
Yeah, Solomon, why don't you come off of mute and go ahead and ask your question directly?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. And hello, Mayor Carter. Thank you, first and foremost, for being here. I've been following your career since seeing you initially speak at St. Thomas in 2000. Maybe this was 10 or 11. And I'll echo everybody by saying that you've been doing a great job. I happen to be a Minneapolis resident, so I can't speak too much into it, but I've been watching from afar, and I'm very appreciative of your work. I'd like to shift gears a bit and talk about city planning and development. With initiatives like Minneapolis 2040, we've seen the metro area change tremendously. And I just wanted to ask you how you envision St. Paul and Minnesota as a whole changing in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
God, such an important question. First, you can get involved. We have lots of wonderful homes for sale and for rent in St. Paul. And so you can absolutely get involved. And we can help you fix that Minneapolis residency and turn it into a St. Paul residency. So let me know when you're ready to do that. That's a great question. Cities across the planet right now, in the 80s, we saw an exodus from cities as people went to the suburbs. We're seeing the opposite right now as people are coming back to cities. So for St. Paul, we in the 2010 census were a city of a population of 284,000. As of last year's Met Council estimate, we're over 315,000. That is like really rapid growth for our community in a relatively short period of time. We're at our all-time high population right now, and we have 2 decades of projected growth in front of us right now. If you ask the state demographer, that's like breathtaking, right? So as it is right now, we are having to figure out how to build our city to accommodate thousands more families, thousands more kids in our schools, thousands more people calling 911, thousands more people trying to get to work and back every day, thousands more people just navigating, walking around our lakes and around our community. And that means we have to think fundamentally different, and we have thousands more coming. And so one of the challenges that I give to our community is, to our city, is that we have to start now figuring out how we build our city for that many more people. Because if we wait till the tail end and say, oh, they're here now, what do? We won't have enough housing units. We won't have enough jobs. We won't have enough transit. We won't have enough car lanes. We won't have enough of anything. And that would be kind of a major crisis for us. So right now, you may have seen this kind of fight that I'm having with a couple of our city council members over this housing development. I'm a member of our Rondo community. My grandfather lost about a half a dozen properties when the freeway on I-94 came through our community, and it uprooted our kind of thriving African-American community. And we're having this conversation right now about a market rate development that folks want to build, that a developer wants to build right here in our neighborhood. And there's a big concern that with this market rate development, none of the units are like deeply affordable. Some of them have some level of affordable, but none of them are deeply affordable in the way that many of our community members need. And we're having this conversation about gentrification, and this conversation that if we welcome this development into our community, will that cause displacement? And it's an interesting space because I think we need some leadership, frankly, and an opportunity to kind of think more creatively about the project. And we're the city, so we don't have to just take it or leave it. We can say, let's work together to make a difference. So my perspective is, let's put some affordability, let's find some resources, let's work together to create the resources to put more affordability into it while ensuring that we build it. From my perspective, the most immediate threat of displacement that we have is that with all these new folks moving in from the suburbs, new folks with resources moving into our community, that the fastest route to displace our community is that if we don't build new housing quickly, that means every time somebody moves in, somebody has to move out. And that's the quickest way. That's the quickest route to displacement. And so all that to say is, I think we need to think differently about how we use land. We're going to have to build up higher than we're used to ensure that we get out of that zero sum math that I was just talking about. We're going to have to think differently about how we get around our community, which means I don't have enough lanes on University Avenue or on 94 to move 60,000 more single occupancy vehicles every day. So thinking about transit and bike lanes and walkways and things like that is an existential need for us. We're going to have to think differently about housing as a right and how we ensure that community members have the ability to live and continue to live with dignity in the community that they helped build. We're going to have to think differently about public safety around economic development and all of those types of things. At the core, I think the core value proposition that I'm making is the traditional approach to city building is very externally focused, right? It says where public safety is concerned, let's find the bad people in our community, get them out of our community, get them as far away from us as possible. Where economic development is concerned, it's centered around let's find potential in Minneapolis or in Wisconsin or somewhere else and pay them to move into our community, right? It's a very deficit-based approach to looking at the community that we say that we love. And so our focus is always on saying, how do we water the seeds that exist in our community? There's challenges in our community we have to solve, but there's an enormous amount of untapped potential that we need to figure out how to tap in our community as well. And that's the core kind of value proposition that I think I'm trying to make, is that our highest and most amazing future as a city lives on the other side of finding new ways every single day to water those seeds that already exist in our community. And we do something like eliminating late fines, or this guaranteed income trial that we launched, or legal services for immigrants and refugees in our communities. Commonly, people look at me and they'll say, that's an important thing, and I get why you're saying that, but is that the proper role of city governance? And I hate that question because it pretends that our role should be defined by repeating the precedents of the things that we've always done. We can't get new outcomes by doing the things that we've always done. Our role should be defined by identifying and working to creatively and courageously meet the needs that people have in our community. And that's what we have to do day in and day out.
Thank you so much for your answer. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the question.
Wow, great. Great. Thank you for joining us, Mayor Carter. Outstanding wrap up. I was going to give you an opportunity to wrap up, but I think that was so eloquent that we'll stop it there due to time. Again, thanks for all you do, the leadership you provide to your community and the broader community, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Have a good remainder of your day, and thank you for your time.
Thank you all.